Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to those here in the room here at Tonsley and Flinders University, and also those of you joining us online. It is fantastic to have you here at our Managing Cybersecurity Threats in the Digital Era, Insights and Solutions. My name's Verity Kingsmill. I'm the Acting Director here of New Venture Institute at Flinders University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. I'd like to firstly start by acknowledging the lands on which we meet for this presentation, knowing that there are people online in a variety of different areas, but the lands on which we meet today are the traditional owners of the Kaurna people. We really respect and understand their spiritual connection to the land and pay respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. On behalf of Flinders University's New Venture Institute, it is a pleasure to welcome you here for this event. I am really looking forward to hearing our three presenters and would particularly like to thank David Bohn, Trish Williams and Mike Barber in joining us today on this topic. It is topical, to say the least, and I am confident that those here in the room and everyone joining online will get deep value out of what our three presenters will be sharing with us today. I'm going to hand over to Angela DeFabio now, and she's going to lead us through this presentation. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Verity. Once again, welcome everyone. It's great to have everyone here. Those of you online, please send through your questions and we'll feed them through. And of course, the audience that are here today will ask Q&A later. So cyber, very topical, as Verity mentioned. It's predicted that cyber is going to cost the global economy by 2025 something like $10.5 trillion. So it's a business model. It happens on a regular basis. Here, domestically, we've got a great exemplar, and David, thank you for your time in talking about my budget's circumstance. But if I think about everyone moving online and doing everything on their cloud or on their computer and the access that you have through your phone, all of those vectors present an opportunity for cybercrime. So it's a very, very important conversation that we're having here today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our third speaker. So David, the director of my budget, who about a year ago was subjected to a ransomware that affected up to 13,000 customers. So it was a significant risk. So what David's going to do is talk about his journey and the harrowing story that it entails. And I like to think that we'll all get some really interesting and valid learnings from this. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I assume that's working. And welcome to everyone who's not here. Normally I'd say this isn't TV, so interact with me, but that's probably going to be a bit incorrect today. I think you said, did you say $10.5 trillion? $10.5
trillion by 2025.
Yeah, unfortunately numbers that big just don't really work in the human mind. But one thing I will say about it is, you know, everyone's familiar with organised crime, the mafia and drug dealing and all the horrible stuff that goes on there. Well, those guys are moving into cybercrime because there's more money to be made. It's a lot easier for them. They don't have to shoot people and all that. So the amount of risk is insane, and that's kind of why I picked that name for the slide. So there we go. So I don't say much, but the last few years and maybe next year is not exactly what we had hoped for. I don't know if anyone remembers New Year's Eve 2020, but it was like, I'm so glad 2019's over. I remember thinking that. Had no idea what 2020 was going to be like. But anyway, let me just talk a bit about my budget. So this is my budget purpose. So purpose of a company is really probably the most important thing, right? So why does the company exist? So my budget exists to eliminate financial stress in the community and improve the financial health of the world. That's why we exist. We don't exist for any other reason. We don't exist to make money, don't exist to win awards, don't exist to do anything else. That's what it's all about. Some of you might go, bullshit, you're here to make money, you're a profit company. Well, my answer to that is, all you guys get up in the morning and you have some purpose in your life, hopefully. And your purpose isn't to breathe. But for a company, money is oxygen. Without it, it dies, no one gets paid, it goes away. So sure, you got to make money so that you can breathe and live, but you actually exist for something more than that, just like you guys wake up with something more than breathing in mind, right? And our vision, so a vision for a company is, in my definition, which is now this slide, what would the world look like if you achieved your purpose? So our vision is to live in a world where financial stress no longer destroys families, lives, and relationships, okay? And just to give you some context, in Australia, right, between the time you brush your teeth this morning and get home, there will have been one suicide from financial stress. And then every 8 hours, like clockwork, effectively 3 a day, with 3 suicides a day through financial stress. And that is a tip of a very big iceberg, because think of all the arguments, all the fighting, all the divorces, all the pain, all the anxiety, all the stress, all the lost opportunity that goes with that. It's a massive issue. And, you know, today's talk's not about that, which it could be, but the way we work and live with money is completely broken. So my budget is about reinventing the way the world uses and lives with money so that you and everyone else can create the life you want to live and have the issues with money abstracted away, so you can choose and see and have a relationship with your future. A bit like Google Maps enables us to get from A to B without knowing how to read a map or a street directory. What we do is provide a similar, analogous solution for living with money. And that makes a big difference. So the last thing I'll say about that is one of our 2025 goals as a company is that we have a 30% lower divorce rate within our client base when you compare it with the rest of the community. So we take this stuff serious, and that's what we're about. The reason I wanted to start with that was to give you a sense of, you know, that's really my life's work now, and it's what our company exists for. And cyber almost took that away from us, okay? So it is really important. And all of you guys listening and watching would have, you know, businesses or careers or aspirations or things you want to do in the world. And what you don't want is to lose it over, you know, a cyber incident, which is very, very possible, okay? So this is a quote, pretty sure it might be a Mark Twain quote. And so I'm going to really try and give you guys some of the things I learned from our experience, okay? It kind of sounds obvious. Good decisions come from experience, but then you have the issue where that experience comes from making mistakes. But you do have the benefit of learning from other people's mistakes. As humans, we're not good at that. We tend to need a crisis to do something. Whether it's give up drinking or be nice to your wife or something, we tend to wait till the last minute or too late far too often. And that's what happens in this space of cyber in particular, because it's kind of, what's the word, when you watch too many violent movies, you get numb to it, what's the word? You sort of, I'm trying to think of the word. Yeah, that's the word I want. We get desensitized to numbers and security, and we kind of go through having no idea really where we are at, right? It's easy when it's real. Like if you walk through a dangerous neighborhood, you'll feel scared because you know it's dangerous and you'll see dodgy people and you'll feel uncomfortable, especially when you're traveling. But in a cyberspace, we are in a super, super dangerous place. And because it's not something we can touch and feel, we can just pretend we're not or think we're covering it. So anyway, what did I learn? All right, so here's some myths that I think we all suffer from, and I certainly did, particularly the first one. So, and that is, we've got the technology, you know, so in my budget case, we're quite a mature security model. Even when the incident happened, we had outsourced, managed network and security, the whole thing, managed by professionals who, you know, we spent 7 figures in the 3 years leading up to it. So we were doing all the right things. So in my mind, we had the right technology, so it's all good. But my view is that technology might be the oxygen that you need. So without it, you can't have a solution. But it's actually your relationship to security that will suffocate and kill you. Does that make sense? That's a bit more profound than it sounds, but dwell on that because, yeah, your relationship to security is what really matters, and being able to be honest with yourself about what that is critical. And a couple of other things, which I don't know if they're missed anymore. I think we're starting to get more educated as community, is that attacks are targeted. So I'm not at risk because I'm not big enough or whatever. Well, that's crap. This is bullshit because, if you think about your home, you lock the doors at night, and if someone come up and tried your door at night, you'd be freaked out by that, wouldn't you? But when it comes to technology and IT, cyber, these guys can be doing that to every single door, and there's a lot more of them, 24/7. They're always looking for that, and they can automate that. And the other one is that attacks are really sophisticated. Some are, but there's a lot you can do, and there's a lot, and it all comes down to governance, which is a boring word, and I'll try and make it less boring when we get to it, but it all comes down to governance, which goes back to that bit about the relationship to security, okay? Because we're all human and we're trying to do our job. And people in IT will run into roadblocks and make decisions that can make you vulnerable to get something working because they've got pressure from marketing or whatever part of the business. But without the right governance, those little things can slip through and you're opening yourself up. So I'm not sure what you guys really want to hear about. Do you want to hear about what happens if you do get an attack? Is that something that people... Okay, so I'll give you a sense of it. So I don't know if that's readable, but let's start at the top right, 1 o'clock or whatever you want to call it. So first thing you notice, something's happened, right? So in our case, I tried to log in on a Saturday to do something mundane and I couldn't. So I'm like, okay. Tried again an hour later, and then I rang our head of IT and said, what's going on? Are we down or something? He said, I'll reboot the system. Then called me and said, it's not working, I'm going in. So I went in and then ring back and said, there's this little dodgy looking note saying, we've got you and, give us a couple of $1 million and we'll fix it. And I'm like, nah, that's bullshit, right? That's not right. Fix it, man. And he goes, we've got everything backed up, so it's all good. Anyway, so we move into implementing your DR, which we had, everything backed up. Our networks were very secure, they're all segregated, all our money's very separate. The area they got into was part of our automated system, because what we do is our clients' salaries come into our environment and then all the money's allocated for all the things they're doing, and then the payments are automated and so on. The software that automates that was affected. So we started backing it up, recovering, and we found that it was taking too long. And that was when I realised that we were actually really screwed, because these guys had encrypted the entire stack of our systems. So, you've got all these servers that all talk to each other and work in a certain way. We were able to recover them, but we didn't have the full stack recoverable at the time. Not in a time enough fashion. So that's when you realise you're screwed. And that's tough, because then you start reading that note very differently, right? Very differently. And then it's like, well, what do we do? Well, we better call the insurer. So we're insured. We were spending, I'll tell you, it was $5,000 a year was our cyber insurance. It was like an add-on to our insurance, which is, we spend 6 figures on insurance, you can imagine. Cyber was just one element, I didn't realise how critical it was at the time. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm not an idiot either. And I think a lot of people don't realise. And what happens then is the insurer takes over. The insurer appoints an incident manager to manage it from a technical perspective. They appoint lawyers to manage all the communications that you have with the regulators and the media. And then they also appoint negotiators, ransomware, and people that actually negotiate ransomware, and they have other things like kidnapping ransoms and all sorts of stuff. And that's all out of your control. So you're in the back seat all of a sudden because they're paying the bills, so that's the way it goes. And so for us, that's kind of the short version of that. To give you a sense of what happened, we have 20-odd thousand clients, 30,000 households, which 20,000 adults. They lost visibility of what their money was. So that's really painful for them, and that hurt us, and we were very upset that that happened. We hadn't lost any money, of course, and we could still manually do it. So what we did, we couldn't just tell everyone to just chill for a week. We had to do something. So we had to go back to the 80s. I don't know if you've ever seen the stock markets with people wait. We were 24/7 dealing with this, and we went to a manual mode where people wrote out. When client called in, we'd look up and literally in a Google sheet where they were, and had to manually write out what was happening and hold their hand up. And there was runners that would take that up to finance, who would then put it into another sheet, process it. And at the end, I'll get to that, at the end, just to let you know, on the weekend when we had rebuilt and got it working, so we had to rebuild a bunch of software that didn't recover as well as we'd like, to pull all the systems back together with no real time to test it on the Saturday night. We then reconciled $70 million manually, which we did, and then import all the money through the system, reconcile again, and then we were ready to enter into our system everything that happened, which was about 1,000 hours of data entry, which started at 1 a.m. on Sunday, and we had to have it finished by 2 a.m. Monday. So we had 25 hours to do that. So there you go. And then no sleep that week, pretty much, sleeping on the floors or in the hotels, and it was not something you'd want to do again, I can assure you. And one thing I would give you advice, if it ever happens to you, you've just got to always believe you're going to get through it. Because if you, for a minute, go, I can't do this, you're going to fall in a heap. And particularly if you're a leader, everyone will just fall over, because they're trusting that you're going to pull them through. Even though you don't know, you can't let that get out that you don't know, you know what I mean? And I've got to say that, you know, in our scenario, Tam and I, we never thought for a second that we wouldn't get through it, you know? Whether that's sane or not, I don't know, but it certainly helped. So, what I learned, trust but verify. So we had, you know, partnerships, we had people in place, we had backups, we had everything done. Everything was in place, you know, managed security, monitoring, reports, paying the right amount of money. Well, I felt like a lot of money, too much maybe, but a lot of money. And so I thought, well, it was all good. I was told it was good. Systems would, you know, systems always have issues, so they get rebuilt, you know. So you'd sort of see it happen, and you've got complex systems with hundreds of, you know, elements to it. You always have one system that's getting rebooted or starting. So you felt like it was all good. But the point is, you know, you need to trust people or you can't survive, you go mad, but you've got to verify it. That's really key. And we'll talk a bit more about that, and hopefully in the Q&A we can talk about how to do that, and I'm sure the other speakers, particularly Mike, might have more to say about that. We've then gone into training. We've had a significant amount of cyber training and cyber hygiene, you know, things like you connect a USB drive to any of our systems, for example. And in fact, you know, just to give you an example, we locked all that out, and then I noticed someone in marketing connecting a USB flash drive once, and I'm like, how the hell is this happening? Go down to IT, and they were bullied in by marketing. And the policy's a policy, and then, so, you know, having policies is one thing, it's really that cultural thing, you know, how I said before, the culture can strangle you. It's like, you know, I can get the IT guys are scared of upsetting, you know, a C-level person, but again, it's like, no, you've got to have a culture where that's okay to say no to them, and everyone understands it. And we're at a point now where we're okay with that, but that's just an example of the kind of issues you'll have. No multi-factor. You got no MFA, you got SFA. So, and I mean that makes things a lot harder for people to get in. And you might laugh about it, but we're moving towards even a normal person who gets into their computer will need an MFA access even inside the office. We're not at that point now, but all admin accounts must have it. You know, we've got people that work in Sri Lanka and the Philippines and the UK. And when COVID hit, everyone had to go work from home. So your security service, you know, expanded very quickly. And without having everything sorted, little holes like that will have a problem. And don't use text either for that. So this is another thing I'd advise anyone who becomes a director or another company. If I was to join a board, I would go into the server room. And if it's a mess, Because you've got to realise, I'm not sure exactly who my audience is here, but believe me, there's a lot of configuration and setup that's complex, very complex. And it needs a lot of discipline. It needs to be configured. Things need to be patched. If you've got software running on on all your machines to stop, bad software running or illegal software, things that shouldn't run, to make sure that's all up to date, patched, working, and monitored, requires discipline. So if your guys can't keep a friggin' server room looking clean, there's no way they're doing that. And I'd be firing them. I certainly wouldn't be joining a board that straight away. That's a massive red flag to me. I don't know if that resonates with anyone in the room, but password policy. The other thing I'd do if I joined a board, I'd get the head of IT and I'd say, open up your laptop, log in and show me, if it's Microsoft, go into Active Directory and show me your password policy. I want to see it. I also want to see that they're using MFA to get into the admin account. And I'd have a look at what it is, and is it, that's meant to be funny and probably shouldn't have put on there because it's not that funny. But, what is your password policy? Like, is it something, we all hate changing passwords, I was reusing passwords for all these different things, and that, I don't now, I use password management, but we all have hundreds of accounts. Most staff will use the same password and they'll use their work email. So there you go. That's an easy way to, some t-shirt company or some candle making company or some whatever company gets hacked and they get a password and a corporate email, well, there's a pretty good vector to come in, okay? I think we're getting better with that. The other thing is finding the right people is really important. And this is because the complexity of the systems that we use are outpacing the capability of the people that are delivering those services, particularly managed service providers. I'm very, very disappointed with where we're at with that at the moment. I don't feel, if you're a managed service provider, I'm not a fanboy at the moment. I'm finding you guys aren't accountable, aren't skilled up enough, and are willing to take on work that you really shouldn't be doing. And I'll use the analogy because we've got a health professional coming in a minute. If I had my knee surgery last year, I didn't think, shit, this guy doesn't know, does he know what, I didn't think, does he know what he's doing? Because you go under anaesthetic, you don't know what happens, they can do anything to you. But you trust, because there's quite a good, governance program around health. There has to be the same around this kind of stuff, but there is not. There is not, and it makes it really hard. And I don't have all the answers. I've got some thoughts, and hopefully the discussion we can get there. But that really weird picture is Buck Rogers in the 21st century and the 25th century. And the reason I put it there is I was looking at the cost of this. Literally, you can have 5 centuries worth of salary if you're the wrong person doing this stuff, that this can cost you easily. So you've got to get an independent opinion, and and you've got to work with the IT guys that's normal, that they're going to be double checked. And then benchmark yourself. So I won't really dwell on this, but things like the Essential 8. One thing I noticed was there were so many things that the actual government provided that were really useful, and we didn't know about them. And then I remember talking, we had a talk with the Premier, a briefing, it was like confidential briefing at your Cybersecurity Centre early on, and hardly anyone heard of what the Essential 8 were. I'd say less than 10% of executives. And yet it's a good start, and benchmark yourself against that, and I'm sure Mike will talk more about that after. Now, business continuity plan might make you want to yawn and go, oh yeah. And I was guilty of that kind of stuff, admittedly. But what it really means here is actually have one. So have one that means you can test it. So I can go back to the office and go to the main switch, for example, and literally just turn it off and know that at that level from our generators, our power's okay, but how do I get to that level with our network and our security? That's what we're working towards. So being able to test to make sure things are recoverable. We're considering the governance around that, whether we separate that and have someone's accountability is just data recovery. That's all they do. So separate that from the person that's accountable to make things run. That's an idea. I don't know if it's a good one. The thing I'm working on the most is the bottom, having some attestation included in your board papers. So this again is that governance thing before, which goes back to the relationship. Governance and relationship to something is pretty much the same thing. So we have, my budget, we have, we're regulated with the financial services license, credit license, all these things. So we have, from the finance team, compliance team, they sign off that, certain things are happening, all our taxes paid, all these things are done. We need something like that from an IT perspective that, and that's what we work on now. Like all our systems are up to date. We've tested these elements for recovery, and they recovered in the 5-hour window or the 2-hour window or the 10-minute one or whatever it is. I want to get to a point where we have that, and that all our partners, the contracts with them, aren't sort of leaving holes. Because that's the other problem. You have a partner doing part of the job, another one doing another part. You're in big trouble because they'll never be accountable. They'll say someone else did it. So, yeah, that's an area that I'm working on now, is how do we get something at a board level where the head of IT and that team are attesting that things are done rather than trusting. That's that trust but verify piece. And it's like a mountain with no top, right? And I stole this from our software engineering team. But it's more like that, right? It's not like you get there. You never get there. You just go through different iterations that get better. It's like self-improvement, really. It's a mountain with no top. You should be able to be a better person in whatever context you want tomorrow than you were today. It's the same with security. You don't just arrive. In fact, in any facet of life, if you take the view that you've arrived there, you're screwed because you just go backwards, right? But no different here. And let's leave you with one thought, again, what do we want? What kind of world do we want to leave for our kids? And, there's so many amazing things that we can do in the 21st century, and they're only going to get more amazing, and they should be all focused on making the world a better place, right? And one of the big threats that are going to get in the way of that is actually cyber security. And you can eliminate, I think, 99, maybe more than 99% of problems just by a few small things. But first, you've got to go, I want to do that, and start doing it. So that's it for me.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you, David. It's interesting as technology moves at a rapid pace, it develops very, very quickly. And you think about we're all connected with IoT devices. Our risk is spread greater, just the fact that we've got all these devices operating in a mesh network. So some terrific learnings. And my other thought to that is David mentioned about having governance at your board meetings, and typically, you talk about finance, you talk about strategy, but having the IT expert at the table is really, really an important thing, and it's an important part of the conversation from an executive level. So thank you. So the back end, we're lucky enough to have Trish Williams. So she's one of our professors. Amazing lady who knows so much. She's got about 20 years worth of experience in IT, security, networks and so forth. So to talk a little bit about the back end, I'd like to welcome Trish Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, David. That was really good. And I think getting a feel for what happens in the real world and what challenges there are is really important. And that role of cybersecurity is very much about helping you achieve that vision for the organisation. One of the reasons that all organisations are a target still is because the information that you hold is valuable to someone. It's not because, there are the occasions where some organisations are attacked or things happen to them from a cybersecurity point of view because there are people who are not happy with the organisation, but that is few and far between. It is much more that you have something that is valuable or something that can be monetised by doing some sort of cybersecurity attack on your company. And, cyber criminals too also realise that being able to completely corrupt a system or stop you working is also a valuable thing to do because, as David said in his case, they want to be able to make money from it. And if they can stop you doing what your organisation normally does, the longer that goes on, the higher value that has back to you. And in the area that I work in healthcare and cybersecurity particularly, that is very, very true. You know, if you're treating patients in an emergency and you can't get the information that you need, that becomes, you know, quite often a life-critical thing. So it depends on actually what you're doing. And in this case, with you know, as with my budget, ransomware is something that you only have to look at a stream any day, and there are lots and lots of different ransomware attacks that are going on, as well as what I would call normal attacks in cybersecurity, where, you know, people are getting into systems. And it has become a really large industry because of the fact that a lot of our security is not all that good. The idea of ransomware is that it doesn't have to be, you know, as David said, it's not the fact that somebody is targeting your company. There are, you know, targeted attacks and very sophisticated ones, and ones that go on for years and years before the company is actually held to ransom. But the majority of them are mostly automated these days, and there are bits of code that run around the internet looking for holes in people's networks so that they can get in somehow or other. And it is quite a clever thing to be able to do that, but the upshot is, obviously, if you're the recipient of that particular attack, it's not good at all. So ransomware has become much more profitable, and partly because there are instances where ransoms get paid, partly because either the organisations are not very familiar with what they could do, maybe they don't have sufficient backups, you know, it's quicker, depending on what the organisation or the industry is. The other problem, and I've just got a couple of things around the very general things that we have in terms of cybersecurity that are still problems, and continually. I used to work on one of these machines, I have to say. They're probably half of the audience won't even recognise what it is, but you know, and in healthcare, unfortunately, we still have some of these machines. I hate to say, but we do. But actually outdated equipment. And because our technology grows so rapidly and changes so rapidly, we can't just throw everything else away. A lot of our critical infrastructure, unfortunately, you know, doesn't necessarily run on this IBM, but, you know, there are expensive bits of equipment, and you don't replace them just because a new one is out. You're not all, you know, 18 and 21-year-old and you've changed your phone every 3 years. Or 2 years or 18 months. You just don't do that necessarily with some of this equipment. So outdated and what we call legacy equipment and software is a problem. And also, you actually never know who's looking at your system. Or in fact, you know, I ran a class this morning on enterprise security with some students, and we were talking about, you know, what happens, the loss of mobile devices. And your mobile device is actually an extension of your arm these days. But the amount of phones that are still lost or destroyed every year, there's something like, even in Australia, 1,400 a day. I'm not quite sure where they've all gone to, but they've all got, and I know that my children have destroyed half of them, but, you know, people losing laptops, leaving them in Ubers and taxis, and you never know who is looking at your information and what you've actually done with it. And we still have this problem, and it's a really, really large problem. And the other thing that is becoming an issue for us, and we're not really keeping up with it, and David alluded to this, is that our systems are very complex. So you might have one application that you use, but even now, and on your phones, you've got multiple applications. They talk to each other. That means each one of those has to have an interface that makes it talk to each other. The more interfaces you have, the more complicated the systems become, the more difficult the security is, because everything isn't one system where it all works together. And if you think about in any organisation that you have multiple computers, multiple things connected to the network, hundreds of applications. All of that creates a very complex environment with which to secure each of those parts. And we're not very good at doing that. And again, the software is obviously a large part of some of the issues that we have. You know, if people are going to get into your system these days, it's not necessarily because they've walked into your office, picked up your laptop and walked out. It's because somewhere in the code, whether it is, you know, through the network, through applications, through things that have been downloaded from a USB that are not supposed to be there, that's all software-based. And we don't, well, some of us understand software, some of us can write it, but the majority of the time you actually have no idea whether what you're running is what you think is running. And we also have a complexity now where we're talking about new technologies, AI, for instance, and machine learning, and that becomes a real black box. You can't even see the code to know what's going on. So how can you make sure that you're securing all of those things as well? And they all become part of this really complex environment that we look at. And so those trends in digital technology are a really important challenge in cybersecurity as well. We always know that there are going to be vulnerabilities. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at cybersecurity, there is always going to be problems. The only way you will never have any problems is do not connect anything. Go home, unplug your computers, just use Word on your computer and never connect it to anything, not even your printer. And then you'll be pretty much, most of the time, you'll be safe. But we're never going to live in that world again. So we talk a lot about having cloud platforms and whether it's for data, for services, and all sorts of other managed services. One thing that we have to do is we do have to have that trust, and usually that trust is articulated through agreements of one sort or another. But you are still having to trust and at the mercy of whoever you've made that agreement with. You need to trust that they are doing what they said they're doing. So, you know, we've moved back to the 1970s and 80s where we have managed services, you know, bureau services, you know, from having that to having everything on your own premise to now going back to this. And we have challenges in terms of being able to understand where it goes. Like a lot of people say, well, where is the cloud? And whether people think it just floats up into the air and somewhere but it's actually on a computer, on a floor somewhere. But all of those types of things, who owns your data when it goes to the cloud? Well, you actually still own your data, but you're not looking after it. You've let somebody else have the responsibility for doing that. And the other thing is the moment that this happens a lot in healthcare and interoperability, but people forget that the moment that you share your data with anybody, you've lost control of it. You might think you have control of it, but in fact, you know, you are relying on somebody else doing what it is that they're supposed to do with that data. And so, you know, all of those things of moving to the cloud particularly, I've got a whole set of questions that people always ask about, you know, who owns it, who looks after it, how do I know it's okay, what jurisdiction and legislation is it under? And the one thing that we are really missing is a good overarching view of the environment. And David sort of intimated to this too, that it comes at that governance level. You can have lots of technical solutions, and you do need those technical solutions, whether it's data loss prevention, you know, antivirus, all those things and other much more sophisticated technical tools. But you have to have some oversight, some view of what is going on, not just from those technical parts. Because now there's so many pieces that it's very difficult to see all of the pieces all in one place. And so you have to have a really good view of that. And I always get my cat in here somewhere. She likes to think she wins. Cybersecurity is a cat and mouse game. There is never, you know, you're supposed to enjoy the journey, not the destination. There's never going to be a destination. There is never going to be something that is really secure. We develop, you know, we have new software. There is not inevitably something wrong with it, but there'll be some mixture of where things are put together that creates a vulnerability of some sort. And, you know, it's a cat and mouse game to, if we work out where the vulnerability is the mouse managed to get in before we've managed to close that, and now we have another one. So that's always going to be the case. And the way that we fix it, much to my cat Scarlett's disgust, is we use ducks. Okay? Ducks are very useful. You need to look at your cybersecurity ducks. Are they all just a complete gaggle? Is that what you call a group of ducks? I don't know, a gaggle of ducks. Well, that's geese. But anyway, you know, do you actually know what's going on? There is a misconception often that IT people are also very good security people. That's not to say they're not, but IT experts are not necessarily security experts. It used to be when I started years ago and we didn't have screens, we had teletypes, you knew everything about computing because it was this big. Now, you think you know about IT. Well, IT doesn't mean to say you know everything about security. And even if you're in security, you may not know everything about penetration testing. But the idea is that you need to have some governance around that so you have a way of being able to know what is going on. You don't have to be able to do it. You just have to have enough intelligence around what is going on to know who does know and who can put those things in place. So you have to get your little ducks in a row and make sure that you're doing something at that governance level and making sure that you do have those security management plans and a business continuity plan, as well as all of the other technical things like having a backup that you can restore, is really important. So over to Mike.
Thank you. Well done, Trish. A group of ducks is a flock. I just discovered. I just made a thought back there, or I just had a thought back there. There's been mention of lots of dollars in this, and you think about it's now a business model and this happens. It happens because it's allowed to happen. So making sure that you don't give them the opportunity to do some harm, I think that's half the battle. So introducing our next speaker, delighted to have Mike, the CEO of the A3C Centre, which is located in Adelaide, at Lot 14. They've got some great capabilities in helping you understand how to manage these sorts of risks. So looking at the solutions, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mike Barber.
Thank you very much, Angela. And thanks to my previous speakers as well. You stole a lot of my thunder, but absolutely touched on the things I would talk about as well. Now, my background, I've worked in IT for probably about 30 odd years now. And a bit like Trish, when she was looking at that computer, I do actually recognise those. I actually worked back in the mainframe type environment, and I think it's fascinating how things have come full circle. There used to be people that you'd call your security guys, and they sat in the back room and they're never allowed to come out. And the most security you ever saw there was the physical security on the building and maybe some password management. And the passwords were about 4 or 5 characters long, and they were usually just numbers. So it has really changed over the years. And as Trish said, the thing that changed it was connectivity. Back in those days, it was pretty much standalone. We used to log on and go get a cup of coffee and come back, and it might have logged onto your system by then. But these days, with the internet and everything and the global connectivity we have, it's just introduced so many issues there. Of course, so much productivity comes with that as well. So the job I'm in now is at the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre, which is really interesting in what the mission is of this area. So there's lots of things in cyber around the country and around the world. But the key with this one is around collaboration. So David was talking about what happened at my budget, and he would have felt pretty alone, I would have thought, when that was actually happening. And so one of the key things with this is you can't fight this on your own. You do actually need to band together. So you need a whole lot of experts and different organisations getting together to actually fight this. So part of the mission of the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre is to actually bring together different organisations, and that can be a whole range of different people. We're a not-for-profit organisation. The initial funding came from the state government to get it going. There's a facility that's been built at Lot 14 in Adelaide. It's absolutely amazing. It's part of a great ecosystem down there with startups and innovation, high-tech, everything going on down there. But our role is to provide some facilities and actually get people together to actually try and solve some of these issues. So we get out there trying to spread the word about how can you be more cyber aware. So there's lots of talks and seminars that go on around the place. And it's interesting, the audiences that we have. So it ranges from, I can tell you yesterday, I think I spoke to about 300 school kids. They all came through our centre. We have a thing called a cyber range in there. And I think David's seen that. And it's a fantastic facility where you can actually go in there and actually do training. You can test products in a safe environment. The way it's set up is you can actually set up an attack team and a defend team, a red team and a blue team. You can do capture the flag type exercises, and the networks are completely separated. So it's air gapped, so you actually do that. You can actually split the room in two. You can connect back to your data centres. It's built in a flexible way where you could test products, software, all those sorts of things in a safe way. So it's a great place to really try it all out on your organisation. And one of the things we look at is, it was talked about before at the executive level, is to actually bring in the management team, put them through an exercise and show them what really happens when ransomware does actually occur. And it's pretty scary. I've seen some of our members present this, and one day you look at your email and next minute it's all coming up with encrypted in front of it and you can't read anything that's in there. What are you going to do about that? So that gets back to that governance level about, right, how are we going to handle this? Have we backed everything up? Have we followed all the right procedures? Let's test it out. The other interesting part about that, it has been mentioned before, is it's not just the IT department's job to sort this out. It is everybody in the organisation. And I'm totally convinced, having more of a laser focus on cyber over the last few months, that it is a cultural thing. It's absolutely a cultural thing through the whole organisation. And we need to get that into society, really, right from an early age, because kids are out there, they're using apps, those sorts of things. They don't quite understand how everything connects together at an early age. Later on, they figure it all out. But as Trish mentioned, there's a lot of legacy systems in there as well. So we see all the flashy stuff at the front end, but there's a lot of old stuff sitting at the back end. Is that secure? The amount of IoT that's out there, the number of devices, like there's billions of devices out there. So you get down to light globes, all sorts of different things. They all have something in there which is addressable. You can actually get to it. You can connect to it. So how do you sort that out? So some of the things that we've been talking about, and in conjunction with the Australian Cyber Security Centre and AustCyber, is around things like secure by design. So secure by design is really about building it in right at the start, not at the end. And that's not easy to do, because Trish was talking about legacy systems. You'd have to go right back through that. That makes it difficult. But everything new that's coming out, you want to build that into your practices. So you want to make sure that every step of the way, cyber is part of that component going forward. Because the IoT side of things is just one area. We talked about cloud as well. So cloud presents another issue there. Where is it? I'm sort of a fan of, if you've got equipment sitting in your own premises, I think you're asking for trouble as well. I think you're better off having that hosted somewhere else. But you do not trust that completely. I actually did some work as a consultant over the last 2 years, and I was just astounded in the small, medium enterprise area of a comment that came back to me. I said, so where is all that run? They said, oh, it's in the cloud. And I said, so you back that up? Oh, no, we don't need to back it up. It's in the cloud. And I said, no, you do, because no one's going to back it up for you. And if that cloud provider went through the hoop, where's all your data? Where's it living? Is it overseas? Is it here? You need to know where it actually is. So there's a whole range of things. I think this is such a huge topic that we can go through. But just going back to the collaboration side of things, let's see if I can get that to work. There we go. This just gives an idea of some of the organisations that are members of the A3C. So you can see on there, there's a bunch of universities in there as well, and defence companies, small business, and even consumers. I call them, like the RAA, Roburn Men's as an example. And the reason they've become members is they want to be part of the ecosystem. They want to be connected to, a wider area. As David was talking about, your managed services providers, you don't just trust them implicitly. You need to actually make sure that they're checked. So there's people in here that do third-party assessments. They come in and do deep dives. They might design stuff for you. Some of those people do training in there. So there's a whole bunch of different services in there. Some are vendors. In the university sector, there's a whole range of things that go in that area, right from research and development across a whole different range of fields, but also how are the students going to be educated through here. So building it into the courses, and not just in IT, but in all courses. Because one of the things that we've seen is, when we talk about the cultural issues around this, is one of the biggest proponents of cybersecurity incidents is actually insider threat. So it's actually people working within your organisation. Now that doesn't mean it's deliberate, a lot of it is accidental, and that means people just clicking on links when they shouldn't and setting off a bomb within your organisation. And it can be deliberate as well. You could have a disgruntled employee who wasn't happy with the pay rise they didn't get, or the job they didn't get, or they're leaving in 2 weeks' time, all those sorts of things. Makes you think about what needs to happen. So some of the jobs that are out there in that space are more behavioural. So even from the HR sector, legal sector, all those sorts of things, if you can get people with some sort of knowledge around this, building that into the organisation, that also helps. So it does get right through the whole company at the end of the day. I'll just talk about a couple of things that we're doing. So we're doing awareness and training and those sorts of things. So we're one of the providers for IRAP training, which is it's a fairly high level assessment criteria that's really used when you're doing work with the Australian government and in defence. So that provides assessors that go out there. So that would be like the top end. If you were getting third-party assessment, they were the sort of people who would give you that really high level and detailed assessment of your organisation. There are plenty of other people out there that can do third-party assessments as well. And one thing I've been involved with over the last few weeks is actually, we talk about supply chain. So it's not just you, it's all the people that are supplying services into you as well is another issue. And I know there's some moves afoot in the government space, particularly with tenders, to actually include something in there when you're actually about to lodge your tender that you need to pre-qualify and actually put in there, well, what is your security posture? And so there's some things that are looked at around, I'll just see if I can get this one again. So the Essential 8, and David showed this one before. So this is put out by the Australian Signals Directorate. So one of the thoughts behind this is, particularly for government, local government and larger organisations going through tender processes, is, well, let's have an assessment process within there to actually check that. Now, you can do that in different ways, and I'm conscious of, small, medium enterprise too, like the sort of cost that will go into that. But it's 3 stages they're looking at. There can be a self-assessment process where you could just tick the box yourself. It'll make you think about where you sit there, and you might be able to score, say, 30, 40 points out of 100. If you had a third-party assessor come in, you might be able to score 70 or 80 points. And if you had like that top-level IRAP type assessor come in, you might be able to score 100 points. So not only is it going to make you think about what you're actually doing within your business, but if you want to try and win business with someone else, it's actually creating a compelling event to actually do that as well. So this is all about trying to push people into thinking around this from the executive level right through to the IT level. It's a fairly... When I came into this role in April this year, I must admit, people were talking around cyber and collaboration and how it all fits together. And I looked at that and I did a fair bit of research around that, and I must admit, wow, there's a lot of things going on in this space. Particularly in the government sector, I've got a map of, from the federal government perspective, all the different organisations that touch in this area, from Scamwatch to privacy to all sorts of things. It is just incredible how far that goes. And I think part of the problem is people trying to understand where they need to go. So people stand up and talk about, right, this is what's happening out there, all these facts and figures, but how do I actually fix it is the thing. And David touched on a really good point there, that the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has oodles of information sitting there. It's incredible. I think we probably need to help them get that out into the greater sphere of industry, particularly SMEs, so people understand the sort of things that they need to do. It's not that hard, a lot of that. It's pretty basic stuff, but if you've never seen it before, you don't know. Like multi-factor authentication that you talked about, David, absolutely key. People, just hotspotting at McDonald's, doing work there. No way. You need a VPN when you're actually doing this. You'd have a VPN probably when you're at home as well, because who knows, your neighbours could be listening in on what you're actually doing as well. So, and there's another piece of that called zero trust networks, which is what you were getting to, is even when you're in the office, you're actually having to authenticate again each time. So it's not just a log on to the network. When you're going into that core application, you'll have to go in again, and that could mean you need a code that's coming off your mobile phone or whatever in a different way. So there's all these different things that can be applied in this. But if I talk briefly too around the whole issue of like, well, where do we get the workforce for this as well? So there's some huge issues at the moment in this space. It's estimated that there's probably a shortage of around 17,000 people in this space in Australia right now. And I like your 2025 slide there. It just means we're going to need more and more people going forward. So this is really important now that we get people looking at, well, there are careers in this space, so there's opportunity in this as well. So there's an opportunity to actually grow in an economic sense in this space, linking with other countries as well, so that collaboration piece comes into it again. And just from a real life example, I had a call with Estonia only 2 days ago. So Estonia is a little country that sits next to Russia. It's about 1.5 million people. And back in 2006, they were absolutely crushed by Russia from an electronic point of view. So massive cyber attacks took them down completely. Fast forward to where they are now, they'll be regarded as one of the best in the world in cyber. They have a university, Tallinn University, that churns out some absolute top-class people in this area, and they are actually looked at like the pinnacle in this area at the moment. So Germany and other countries really look to them about what they're actually doing. And it's fascinating to talk to them. And you know what? They just want to share the information with you. There's no tag on it. There's no invoice coming. They actually want to show this is what we can do. So we were actually talking about setting up some war games, if you like, across the seas from our cyber range to their cyber range, which can hook into other ones. So this gets people interested, particularly young people as well. So they run programs from 16 to 21-year-olds. They get them in teams, and they have these hackathons that would run for a couple of days, and they set them a project, and away they go. Because you do have to make this interesting as well. And I think where I am at in Lot 14, if you come into that cyber range and see what it's like, it looks pretty cool. There's some really big monitors in there and those sorts of things worth a lot of money, and it looks fascinating. But there is a meaning for that, is trying to attract people into this and see that there is quite a good career in this sort of space. I'm probably running short on time at the moment, but the workforce area is a key area that we need to actually look at. Just a quick bit on tools and resources, and we might cover this off in Q&A, but I've done quite a few talks around this, and a classic was in the early days of this was someone said to me, I'm a small business, what if I said it'll never happen to me? And I said, I'll introduce you to someone where it has. And that's the best thing, because what you went through today was absolutely perfect. And I've actually heard that story before. I know people have been impacted with that. I've been impacted myself. I was in a very senior executive role at a multinational company, and this is going back about 4 years. And someone had managed to get hold of my email. And what they did was, it was a phishing exercise. And so they studied that for a while. I sent out staff newsletters and all sorts of things, and you don't know how your email gets passed around as well. Like you might send something to someone, they forward it to a home address, it gets out somewhere. My email looked exactly like how I would write it. The wording, the tone, the way I sign off, everything in there. And it went to one of our accountants, and I was demanding that he pay someone $40,000 by the end of the day, and I was hounding him. I hounded him 3 or 4 times during the day, apparently, and I said, Andrew, you must get this done. He came running down the corridor at about 10 to 5, and he said, Mike, I finally got to it. I said, what did you get to? And he said, I finally got that thing through that you wanted. I said, what was that? They said, the $40,000, do you want to transfer it? And I said, are you kidding me? We raced back down, had a look at it. I said, ring the bank now, stop it. Couldn't. 10 minutes had gone. It was already gone. We had a look at that email that he'd got, or the number of emails that he got, and all we had to do was look at my email address. Mine was michael.barber, that was my official one. This was mike.barber, and it had obviously the other stuff that goes behind it. I won't say who it was. But if you clicked on it as well, it actually showed up a Hotmail address as well behind it. That was 4 or 5 years ago when all this stuff was starting. And it happens more and more today. But I just could not believe how accurate that was. You know, I always say, you know, hi David or whatever. I would never go dear or anything like that to people internally. So there you go, first-hand experience for that. And plus, we were a pretty big company doing a lot of managed services work in IT, and I can tell you, we did have an incident where something slipped through the back door. So I can give you some peace of mind here with critical infrastructure and those sorts of things. People like the Australian Signals Directorate and ACSC, they are monitoring that 24/7. They picked up a very small change in code that slipped through our systems, and we have massive firewall systems and everything in there. It got in to a very sort of low-level admin server doing nothing. We monitor it, we kept the door open basically for 3 weeks, and these guys came in and analysed that, and they could trace it right back to the source of where that came from. So I did feel comfortable with that. We knew we were doing everything we could do. They weren't going to take us down, but what I was worried about is the sabotage that can go on within that. So it wasn't about crippling our systems. It was, we're going for all these tenders, as an example, and we're always losing by $1 every single time. That's because our information is being pilfered and sold off to someone else. Anyway, so I'll leave it on that happy note of how it all goes, but rest assured, our role is to try and help people in this space, and collaboration is the key to all of that.
That is perfect.
Thanks,
Thank you very much. Yeah, great insights, and please reach out to A3C. They're there to help, which is really, really important. So what we might do is we'll do a Q&A session. So if I can invite our 3 speakers to the floor, and I might just get some help with the chairs. What we'll do is we'll have a roving mic person, that might be me maybe, to ask questions. And then for those of you online, please send them through. We've got someone standing by and we'll ask those questions on your behalf. So whilst we get our speakers set up, does anyone want to have first question? Anyone online? No questions? So...
No questions?
No questions?
Everyone asleep? Should be heaps of questions. I mean,
Everybody's stunned.
Mike said at the end about that person that got the 40K.
Yeah.
You know, I know some directors of some companies that manage large amounts of money, you know, for, and what happened with them is that one of their managed investment funds was infiltrated, and they learnt the whole pattern. And the CFO of this company, smart place, they had a $5 million 90-day rollover. They got sent a 30 basis point special if you roll it now, and they did it. $5 million. Yep. That's not very long ago. Happens all the time.
It does, absolutely.
That's big money. And
Has anyone else got any live examples that they've experienced?
I can give you one.
Yep.
So the particular Chris Clarkson DCI data centres. The particular one I had is it looked like it was coming from my CEO, but from a personal email address.
Yeah.
And it was using exactly the situation you had, Mike, using his style, saying, "I need you to do this personal thing for me."
Yep. Another great example. Does anyone want to add to that?
And actually, just on that too, where I'm working at the moment, it's quite a small organisation by size, but one of the things that we did do was just a little, an information session with our own people. And I actually found this useful. I've worked in a lot of organisations, but have the security guys ever come up and given you a total report about what happened over the last month? And this was really interesting about, here were all the attempts on the organisation. Having cyber in your name, you know, makes you a target straight away. But you could see hundreds and hundreds of attacks in there. And then you could see what your technology was actually doing to defend it. We also ran little phishing exercises as well. I'm sure many organisations have done that as well. But that's really good to do as well, just to test people out and, you know, put up little signs on their computers and things like that going, "Ha ha, gotcha." At the end of the week, whoever's got, you know, the most has to buy the beers. But there were other things too around training as well. So you can put all these little governance things in there. You can have a bit of fun with it as well. But guess what it's doing? Like, you walk away from your computer, so lock the screen. All those sorts of things. It's just these little things that make the cultural change in there. You know, we're working in an open space environment. A lot of people work in open space environments. I have a thing around clean desk policy. And I know people have lots of stuff sitting around their desk, but do not have your computer left on your desk. Do not have electronic devices sitting there. Lock them away. And the other big one is USB keys. People go to conferences, probably not so much today. It's probably good that they're virtual. But, you know, a lot of show bags are out there with USB keys and things like that. Some of those can be fraught with danger. You know, they'll encrypt you in 5 seconds. So little things like that. But I actually found just doing some of those real life examples in the workplace, it's actually a bit of fun, but also it builds up that cultural and sort of, you know, this is the things that we should be doing.
Just an extension of that, I know a major organisation that is exactly doing that. So they've got their IT and security team, and they send out to all of their members just random attacks, and they come in all shapes and sizes because they don't all look the same.
That's right.
Yeah, we do that. But we also used to get the report of all the attacks.
Yeah.
And I think I felt, well, we've got, the numbers were crazy, like tens of thousands of attacks every month, and we dealt with them all. So you thought, well, everything was great. So that's the thing to be careful of as well. Yeah. You do want to see that, but you don't want to make it, you don't want to have it get you complacent, which is what I think can happen as well.
I might share an example. Oh, sorry, got a question?
Thanks. Libby Day from the Australian Medical Alert Foundation. I think it's really interesting talking about culture, and I know this is a cybersecurity, digital IT, what's behind it, but with culture, it's about people and about human behaviour, right? And so my question is around those organisations coming back from the brink of this, where there's either a culture of blame, i.e. blame the IT department, or a culture of continuous learning, i.e. we have to get better at this and we have to share what's happened. I just wonder if the panel have any views on that.
I do, but
go for it.
Anyone want to go first? Yeah, look, culture's one of the most important things for an organisation, and when you run and build an organisation, you need to be intentional about creating the culture. So I might put a bit of definition around what that means. So my definition of culture is really the sum of all the relationships that the organisation has, both internally and externally. And a relationship can be defined as the sum of all the conversations that have happened in that relationship. So conversations are super important because that's what most of what we deal with only exist in language, right? This chair exists whether I talk about it or not, but this Friday, that only exists in language. So when we start talking about these things, they become abstract. So you've got to create a whole narrative and a whole culture, which is really a language, which is a relationship to something. So with us, you know, we've had to implement and train people about, you know, and we do all these tests, but get them to realise what the risk is and how important it is, and bring it back to something that resonates. You know, like people in our organisation get out of bed to make a difference in the world, and if they're slack and not paying attention to picking up something off the floor or, you know, logging off their screen, which sometimes I still do, but, you know, if they don't do those things, they put everything at risk that matters to them. So we can put it in that perspective. And I'll give you a simple analogy, right? If you have a small child and they are walking with you on a street and they run off into the street, what do? You run after them and you go flat chat, like you break the sound barrier pretty much. You don't sit there and go, oh, man, I'm tired, you know. I'm a bit knackered, right? That sounds funny, but what's happening is the context that you are putting on that person, that little person. They mean everything to you. They have your love. They mean so much to you that you die for them, literally. And you're not going to worry about how tired you are. You're going to launch yourself to grab them. So again, culture is about creating connections with what your organisation does, such that the behaviours you want and the dedication and all those things are there. So when it comes to security, it's the same. It's like, this is what can happen, this is why it can happen, this is why we expect you to have this relationship to that. And we've had massive improvements in people not clicking on things and getting things right. And we've still got a long way to go, which is like why I call it a mountain with no top. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah.
Good.
And I think in addition to that, one thing we have to get better at from a cybersecurity point of view is integrating what those security measures are that we want people to do, but into their workflow. So in healthcare, that's a real problem because, trying to change clinical workflow because I want them to keep entering passwords or have multi-factor authentication is a real problem. And the same thing with, privacy of information. If I'm well, then I don't want my medical record splashed across the front of the newspaper. If I'm ill and I'm in the emergency department, I don't care who looks at it. So some of these things are quite contextual, and we need to be smarter about how we integrate it into environments and creating that culture.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it gets back to what you were saying the other day with your analogy, but identify what your most valuable asset is or the information is and really protect that. I don't think, if you made your whole life, let's secure everything, down to the nth degree, it's not going to be practical to actually do that. So it does actually get to a point where what's most valuable, what could you sort of live without, like what's not as important, but put all your focus on that most precious asset that you've got, and it could be the core piece of your whole business. You've got to make sure that that's right. Something else you might just let, you'll address it, but you don't have to go to the nth degree. I've actually seen people do this when they're working in the defence sector as well, and it is a problem. Like, people want to work with defence because there's big contracts that come out there, and if they don't understand that process, they'll go through this massive list of things that they have to do, and they thought they had to do. They didn't have to. They probably ended to do that much because the work they were doing was only going to affect that much area. So you can actually waste a lot of time and productivity, and I think some people get scared off with that as well. And particularly with SMEs, it's a big overhead to put all that time and investment into that. So my number one piece of advice on that is look at what's most valuable and protect that, and put in some basic measures that you do that, and then continue to do it. Don't just do it once and forget about it.
We've got an online question I'm going to ask here, and I'm going to summarise, which flows on probably really well from what you've just talked about there. But if you were to advise people to start with just the top 3 things to start with, because some of the information feels a bit like how long is a piece of string, because it is continuous improvement. If you're going to start with 3 things, what would you recommend as a starting point?
Do you want me to go first? I would get a check, an external check done, like a health check of the organisation, and I won't put them in any order. Health check first to see how you actually sit at the moment. Second one I would probably go to would be the backup side of things. I would make sure that things are backed up, and then the other one I'd be looking at the access, which would be around passwords and IDs and those sorts of things. So without going to all the other stuff that you should do, they're probably my top 3.
I agree, but I disagree. I would say back up, and back up.
Yeah.
And only because still today, not necessarily most organisations, but individuals particularly are rubbish. How many of you used your computer today? And how many of you have backed it up? Or in the last week? Or in the last... And I have,
on the cloud.
Therein lies our conundrum. But actually doing some of we're very bad about doing the basic things. And we just assume that either they're done or it won't happen. And we're very lackadaisical like that with our own data. So when you're looking at it from an organisational point of view, because, if you don't own the organisation or you're working for it, you don't necessarily have that same view of the value of it. So I think obviously the backup thing, but the second thing I think is much higher, and that is about that governance level. What oversight, do you actually know what's going on in your organisation, and what do you have in place for that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because, I don't know, 90-odd% of organisations are small. So what can they do? First thing is have multi-factor authentication. And if you don't know what that means, find out. so that you cannot connect to your network without multi-factor authentication. Ensure that's there. Understand that you have a password policy, right? Because you might have zero-length passwords for all you know. I've heard of that. And that they're changed. And then the backup piece, you don't have backups unless you actually watch them get backed up. So if you've got people working for you who back stuff up, ultimately I'd like to be able to go and just break, take a sledgehammer to something, metaphorically, and watch it fix itself. So unless you can actually test that it's backed up, or you can pull a cable out and lose the connection, and then it fails over, then it's just, it's fantasy, right? It really is, and they're the three things I would start with. And then, of course, get someone independent, and we did touch on that, and this is an area I'd love to see more, like I said about getting surgery. Well, the doctor's a fellow of the, whatever college of medicine they need to be. That's a very rigorous amount of training to be certified. You're giving a managed service provider or a network provider, or you're hiring someone, how do you know what their certification should be? It's lacking majorly. Right. So I'd like to start seeing that, and we are doing some work on that, but I'd love to know what that would be, so that if I'm giving someone some work, I know they're certified and they know what they're doing. Right now you don't. And there's not a lot of honesty from that perspective. Another thing I wanted to mention that we haven't said, and I said it to a bunch of IT managers the other day, how many of you guys have been hacked? And about third said, yeah. I said, well, the rest of you are lying, or you just don't know. And I don't know what's worse, really. But everyone is getting hacked. Everyone will get hacked. You just want to minimise the damage of it, but you will get done.
Can I just take a moment to have a look at, and I think, Mike, you mentioned supply chain. Knowing how some of these viruses and how they try to look at ways of spreading viruses and opportunities, if a company wants to trade with another company, in a little bit like insurance, you get a certificate of currency, can you see that in the future, in order to trade with another company, there'd be, give me your certificate of cyber hygiene?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's basically there today. If you're working in the government sector, it's already there. They already built in. So the bit I touched on was like at the front end of the tender process, but it's absolutely there. So I've been involved with that over the years, and there are certain certifications, there's frameworks that you have to abide by. So take the state government here as an example. They have an information security management framework. If you can't actually live up to that, you're not going to get the work. So there's a checklist that you have to go through in that. There are other certifications that you have to have, like there's one called ISO 27001 as an example, plus others that are in there. So, and they are not cheap. So I'll put that out there. At the small organisation I worked for many years ago, we won some work in government and we had to comply with that. And the sales guy said, no worries, tick the box. And I came along and they go, right, $300,000 later, we got there. Small companies can't afford that. So, there's things in there too where you may have to compromise whether you comply with it or you're actually certified. But you have to find a way to do that, because you do have to make sure that supply chain, you're only, you can go back to, you're only as strong as your weakest link in that supply chain. But I think it will absolutely come in there, because like David's talking about there, you don't know. You've got that managed service provider. You don't know what certification they have. I did some work with another company, small company, and they said they specialised in cybersecurity. And I said, show me what that looks like. I found out it was a couple of people sitting in Philippines doing some monitoring. There was no reporting, anything. They had many suppliers, companies. I was just gobsmacked that was happening.
Do you think the Essential 8 might be a framework for that?
It's a starting point. That's all it is. It's a baseline for that. It will build from there. It won't stay as Essential 8. It's already changing now. It'll be like the Essential 20 or something like that at some stage. But people need help with that as well. They don't understand it. 3 or 4 of those things you might understand in that Essential 8. A lot of the other stuff like whitelisting, application control, those sorts of things. People go, huh, what's that? That's where you need some help. But there are some really good resources out there. So we keep talking about Essential 8, but the ACSC or ASD, their website, you go on there, they have oodles of information for large, small, medium business, individuals, families, kids, the whole lot. It's worth a look. It can help.
And I think the key point is actually you need to do it before something happens.
Yeah.
People always go and look at them after something's happened to say, oh yeah, I wish you'd known about that before, because the way that we are, you know, you don't have enough time, there's not enough resources, it's just another thing that you have to do. But I think we need to get to a point where it is another normal thing we have to do, like the fact that you do have to have insurance for this, that and the other. But you need to have somebody to have responsibility for that, which then comes up to that governance factor.
And that goes to David's point earlier, is that, you know, something that you love and trust like a child, you want to do everything that you can to protect them from something happening down the track, right? So, yeah. Do we have, another question?
Yeah, just a point there on insurance. You know, if you think about that estimated $5 trillion hit to the global economy, how do you think insurers are acting in this space now? I'll give you a real example with our company. We're currently going through and reapplying for our cyber insurance, exactly the same policy last year. It's a whole different set of questions. The bar is getting raised and it's getting raised because they have to minimise their risk. So that's the other thing. And I also know, you know, I've heard people say, oh, well, it's okay, I'll get cyber insurance, they'll sort it all out. It's like the tail wagging the dog, right? It's that, yeah.
Well, cyber insurance is going up about 10x. A number of, insurances, in fact, in the financial services space with other insurances, it's almost, they're pulling out of insurance. So it's look, I'll be surprised if that's an insurable thing in the next few years. I just think that's going to be too risky. I know we paid $5 grand for our insurance. It was a few $1 million. It wasn't enough, by the way. You can easily, you know, the kind of cost is comparable to a year's revenue or more. I mean, it's depending on the situation. And I think we can be very judgmental about people paying ransoms, but we're talking about very professional organised crime groups who actually give you better customer service than the Platinum Centurion card will. When you pay them, they'll come in and fix everything, give you tech support, make sure you're working. And they won't leak your data because it's the professional ones, because it's their business model. And, you know, we didn't pay. We had a bunch of amateurs that must have stolen the software or whatever because they couldn't, it was quicker for us to fix things than to get them to reply to us and even work it out. Because, again, the insurer calls the shots. They can say, it's your decision, but at this stage, if they can say you pay, and if you say no, because they're money anyway, but you say no, and then it costs more, they won't. They can not pay because you didn't choose to do that. So it's not that simple. Because I did get a sense that, you know, I can feel for people when I understand why they pay. It's terrible, and it's obviously going to encourage more of it, but it is what it is. Someone takes your kid and wants $1 million, what are you going to do? Well, that's not worth it. I'm not paying $1 million for my kid back. Well, you will pay it. You just will. So don't sit there thinking that you'll be a hero and muscle through, because you won't.
You're dead right. You're dead right, David. I've heard stories about the good and the bad terrorists, if you like, in that space, where the good guys, they will actually unlock your systems and take your money, and then you got the bad guys, they'll take your money and they won't unlock it. They'll go again and again and again. And I've actually seen that through the cyber insurance side of things, where they actually know they've got the list of who the good guys are, or the good bad guys and the bad guys on that side of it. And you're right, Libby, the way that insurance structure is changing, it's getting to, like one of those old cartoons, it's got to be on the 10th of August, the yellow car goes in front of you with a zebra jumping over the top, and if that doesn't happen, we don't pay. So it's getting to that sort of it's getting to that sort of stage where it only covers certain amounts. So it might only cover the cost of what you had to pay a consultant or a contractor to come in and actually restore your system, but what about the millions of dollars of business that you lost? It may not cover that.
Yeah.
There is so much that we have covered in this conversation, and I know that there's more questions that we can ask, and that I personally have found this conversation deeply valuable. I know that in the room and online we have a variety of people representing companies of various sizes. I'm going to ask one clarifying point before we finish off, because from a New Ventures Institute we deal with startups and people in those early stages. Can you you've mentioned ACSC and ADS as being a really good resource as a starting point as well. Yeah. Can you just repeat who they are so that at least some of our startups or our founders can actually just go on and have a look at some of those resources? Yep. And also for companies that are small, medium or large, knowing those resources are there again. What were the three names? Yeah,
so the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. So if you just punched in ACSC or ASD, it's all part of the same organisation. They'll point you to a whole lot of resources. That's the best place, the single place to go.
Fantastic.
As a starting point. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Look, on behalf of everyone in the room, on behalf of everyone online, thank you so much. Trish, Mike and Dave, thank you so much for your time today. As much as I am hesitant to say we have recorded this, and I really want to say we'll send it around and share it as much as you possibly can. I'm also rethinking that sentence about how best to share it, but I do encourage you to re-watch what's been covered, share it with people who you think would value from listening to this as well. We have a small gift to thank you. There's a bit of play on words with these gifts because of one is representing where we keep all our information, and one is representing where we should never keep any of our information.
Oh, thank you.
Feel free, for the one that's in the little black box, to use it as a demonstration piece of what not to use whenever you like. We can provide you with more. There's a flash drive.
Not using it.
It's got all our passwords on it. No, it doesn't.
Spy pen as well.
It's a spy pen and a flash drive.
Pictures on it for you.
Right.
But thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our speakers for their valuable time. We look forward to seeing you again at future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those in the room, please come and join us. We do have some drinks and meals outside as well.
Sorry, I went on about USB.